If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just speak love and watch the smiles come, bring my spirits up. There's some shit I like to fix, but I still know that I'm blessed.
Hi guys, welcome back. I'm gonna do something a little different here today, and I apologize in advance for the noise. We've got tree trimming and wood chipping and all kinds of stuff going on around here today. I didn't want to delay getting this out to you, so putting together the full video with pictures and articles and stuff would take too long, and this is hot off the press, so I'm just gonna have this tour of Cal Poly playing in the background. I'll insert some other things, but I want to go through these notes. Hopefully I'll be able to read them because I was having to write really super fast going through this today. So hopefully we'll make this work, and at least you'll have the information that happened today. Today being March 30th, 2022, at the 8:30 hearing for the change of venue motion for Paul Flores and Ruben Flores. Look how pretty the mountains are in the background. It's so pretty here. Anyway, let's jump right into it. I've got several pages of notes here, so let's cover it. And what I kind of do it as I'm waiting as like diary style. So anyway, I'm just gonna read it as I noted it. So I got up early as usual, and I'm always a little bit anxious because it's so hit or miss with the county court system live streams here in our county and other counties as well. I know it's problematic. I've heard and experienced that regarding other cases. So at 8:30 a.m. when I got on there, I was encouraged because it showed a countdown leading up to the live stream saying it's going to be in 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, counting down. But then once 8:30 hit, the stream didn't start. And of course, I'm rushing around trying to get my chai tea ready, and it's one of those hurry up and wait, hurry up and wait. I assume they were probably taking care of some housekeeping things maybe in the courtroom before the broadcast. And this hearing's super important, and I really want to watch it live. I want to hear not just what the news covers in one paragraph. I want to see how it occurs and what both sides say and how the judge breaks it down. So about 10 minutes after waiting, once it said it would start, there was a black screen with the judge's name, Judge Van Ruin. And I really got excited then. A little bit of a rush because I really want to hear this decision, and I want to get on to the hearing, the actual trial that's going to be happening so far as we know on April 25th of 2022. So of course it's super noisy around here, like I said, with the tree trimming and stuff. So I was having a hard time hearing some of it. I had to turn it up pretty loud. So let's see. All right. Oh yeah, and real quick, while I was waiting, Ruben's attorney, like they appeared on the screen like they were probably dialing in their Zoom stuff. Then it went back to the black screen for the judge. And I knew then this is happening today. Everybody's there and ready to go. So that was really encouraging. And I had my pen and paper ready to cover whatever was said. And one thing I noted is Ruben pretty much always appears remotely. He's out while he's waiting trial. And a few minutes later, Paul showed up, and it looks like he was sitting in the jail. He looked miserable. He had like a white brick wall behind him. He was dressed in a suit. He had a mask, so all you could see were his eyes and, his forehead, of course. And Paul I was thinking he probably wasn't happy because he usually likes to make sure he appears in court so he can get out. He's, in his own words, he likes to get out. But I'm assuming Sanger probably wasn't able to make it to the county for the hearing. He's super busy, and he's stationed. His office is in the next county south, Santa Barbara. So while this was going on, the judge's chair sat empty, and you could hear like people kind of talking in the background and stuff, kind of like hot mic stuff. Nothing worth mentioning was said, but you could just tell that we're getting closer. They're going to come soon. So Paul looked troubled, more than usual. Even though he had his mask on, you could see his furrowed brow. And he just looked stressed. So the judge came on record right away. Like I said, everybody else was remote. And the judge had Sanger start with introductions. So that all went, so they have that on record so they know who's there. The court said that he'd reviewed all the documents regarding the change of venue, and he told Sanger to go ahead with his arguments first. One of the things Sanger talked about is that the prosecution had put in their rebuttal that it was too early for a request for change of venue, and that's usually done at jury selection, voir dire is what they call it, where you're able to actually see how fit the jury is. And Sanger said that the reason they're not doing it that way is there's just too much publicity. And then he started naming all the different things, which we've discussed before, so I'll just touch on what I was able to jot down real quick. He actually accused the sheriff of possibly violating the gag order as well regarding the case, which I found interesting. Quoting January 2022, when the sheriff came out and said that the biggest story for SLO County for 2021 was this Kristin Smart case and the arrests. And Sanger said that proves that publicity has gone far beyond the time of the crime itself. He says that there's thousands of people, probably tens of thousands of people that he could poll if he was able. And he goes into some detail on why they didn't do that as well. He said it's not like a situation where the gory details are revealed at the time of the crime and things tapered off. He says everything's persisted and accelerated as far as publicity with the search warrants, the arrest, and everything else here in the county. He talked about unsolicited stories, podcasts, etc. The police actually used fake media regarding trucks to see if the Flores family would act and contact each other, and maybe they could get information that way, and apparently that did not work, according to Sanger. Sanger said it's very unique that for 25 years there's been billboards around the county, and not just news, but what he calls infotainment. He accuses the cops of inviting the press to the arrest and the searches. He feels the sheriff once again violated the gag order, as mentioned, so he wanted to talk about that several times. He says the focus has always been on Paul, Ruben, and even Susan. He says there's been harassment, restraining orders. It's overwhelmingly clear that it's dangerous to have the trial here in SLO County and that they would not be able to get a fair trial. They talked about voir dire again as far as jury selection, and that the cases that were cited were regarding misconduct after the court, which is why he's requesting it now. He doesn't want to deal with the misconduct or problems with the jury after. He wants to just get a fair trial from the beginning. Okay, so, and he says all he has to prove under rule of law is the reasonable likelihood that there's a prejudice and a clear and present danger. He said the last point that he wanted to make as far as the prosecution's rebuttal, where they cited the Ramirez case and the surveys, and talked about how that would be impractical because you can't use people's home phone numbers anymore, and the cell phones weren't feasible, and he listed multiple reasons why. Basically, he's just saying that doing an actual survey wasn't practicable, and the other ways they were finally able to figure out would have been way too costly for them to do. I kept my eye on Paul and Ruben and everybody as things played out, and Paul remained with a furrowed brow the whole time, and Ruben was leaning forward towards the screen multiple times. Let's see. The judge asked Ruben's attorney, Mr. Misek, if he wanted to speak once Sanger was done. And he didn't say much at all. He's usually a man of few words, but what he did say was that he doubts there could be a fair trial in any county, and that he quoted an Old Testament verse and he said he wasn't getting it exact, but it just spoke about vengeance being one of the oldest things, as old as time. And obviously referring to people in SLO County wanting vengeance. He said the entire county is 100% slanted towards the guilt of Paul and Reuben. He says that they say they want a fair trial and then they want to hang them at sundown. And it's just not in the best interest of justice to have the trial here. So that's all that Mr. Misek, Reuben's attorney, had to say. And then Crystal Seiler spoke for the prosecution, and she spoke at length, and she wanted to focus on 2 objections. And the first one was regarding Susan Flores's declaration. And she basically said it can't be verified and that she is biased, being Susan is biased, and that Susan refuses to testify. She's already invoked her 5th Amendment right to self-incrimination, and she won't be testifying in any hearings and has not, or trials. They say, she said she's not reliable and that the court should not accept her declaration. And obviously partly because they can't cross-examine her to get more information regarding her story. And that would be the only objection as far as the declarations that they would not want submissible, or for the judge to consider, basically. She also went on to say that the so-called publicity that the defense keeps referring to is actual factual news from the authorities, and she named some of the facts of evidence and search warrants and arrest warrants and so on. She says there are 5 factors. She's not going to touch on them all, but she says the news coverage here has not been sensationalized, such as in a mass murder or a mass shooting, and even the Supreme Court had denied on cases that weren't big cases. They denied the change of venue motions. She again mentioned the Richard Ramirez case, which, yes, indeed, that's a Night Stalker. A lot of people remember that case from Southern California. I remember that case. I'm just going to break away real quick, but I was a youngster, and I would go to my father's house on weekends, and he lived in a 1-story yellow house, and that was one of the targeted type homes that they were thinking that the Night Stalker was targeting, and they knew he was in Southern California. They knew he had made it to San Francisco. So they had the whole state on notice. And I remember I could barely sleep those weekends staying at my dad's. I was so terrified he was going to pick his yellow house and come in and kill us. So that was a really scary time for everybody. But the Night Stalker, for example, he was known before the crime as the Night Stalker before they caught him, where Kristin is only known because she's a victim, and Paul is only known because his case as well. He wasn't a celebrity or known in any way prior to this happening. She says the evidence is based on, it's evidence-based, not based on bias, as far as what the media has been covering and what the law enforcement has come out with. And by the way, just a little note I made, she was doing a really good job on her points, I felt. I still had my doubts as far as what was going to happen, because I do live here and I do know how strong the sentiment is and how most of us feel about the case. She did quote some facts regarding the coverage not being inflammatory but factual, such as Paul was last seen with Kristin. That's a fact. It's confirmed. That's factual. So she's saying that's not bias or inflammatory. It's the facts. She named some other bigger cases and how law enforcement has come out and been a lot more expressive in what they've covered. And for me personally, it reminded me of Grady Judd. Most of you probably know that sheriff from Florida. When he comes out and talks about these people at arrest time, he says it the way it is. No holds bar. I mean, he even talks about how small their brains are and calls them names and, says it for what it is. And that hasn't happened here. It's been factual. And it's a shame that we have to coddle these criminals when they're caught so much. Maybe not so much in Florida as California, but that's what came to mind when that was being covered. She says the defense has no numbers proving local opinions or how many hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands people feel a certain way. She went on to break down the defense's exhibits and said many of them were duplicated and named those all down as far as duplications. She claimed the news coverage had tapered off, and in the last 6 months, there had only been 4 small news stories locally. She says, no prior knowledge of the case, not able to see. Not sure exactly what I meant in that notation, but she was basically heavily relying on that everybody's known in this case only because this case happened, not because anything preceding. She talked about the Polly Class case, which was also a case in Petaluma, not far from where I was in Napa. That was another case I followed, and I just remember how devastating it was when they found her and that whole thing. So there was no knowledge of Davis, which was the murder of Polly Class. She talks about Ramirez again. And prior to sitting on the jury, the jurors didn't know about him, most of them. She claims the defense did not meet their burden of proof for this. And she again says that voir dire is the place to see if juries are fit to sit. And she says it's everyone's best interest to have a fair trial. And once again, remind everybody they're not celebrities, and request for the judge to deny the motion for change of venue. Then the defense spoke again, of course, and he started off with complimenting how she had covered her points, that she did a good job, but there's two major problems in his opinion. And the first one he said is he doesn't have to show prejudice, and that she mentioned cases that were already found guilty. And the difference is this trial hasn't happened yet. And he wants to show that the prejudice before it goes to trial, not after, as in the cases she quoted. He said all he has to prove is the reasonable likelihood. That's the legal standard. And right there, the judge interrupted him, actually, and wanted to clear up some things. That even though those were done after the verdict, and there was more information after a verdict to prove bias, that he was still considering those differences for post-case trials because they're relevant in other ways for his consideration. So he wanted Singer to know that they were being considered, but for other reasons. And then he turned it back over to Sanger, which is Paul's defense attorney. And Sanger didn't feel the same as the judge. And he said, of course, I'm not going to tell your honor that you're incorrect. But he just kept saying that what the judge stated was very interesting, very interesting. And he again referred to Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. And even without naming, referred to the Scott Peterson possible jury misconduct that's going on right now and the bias. And it was clear he was talking about that case, which most of you know they tried to actually interject Scott Peterson into this case for reasonable doubt. I don't know if they're going to pull that all at the main trial because Scott Peterson was at the school when this was all going down. And so they're thinking, well, he murdered his wife. He probably murdered Kristin, which that's been investigated and proven not to be true. So we'll see if that's one of the tactics used in the case or not. Okay, Singer went on to say that he never said there was a hex on Olive Slough County, but it just takes one jury to take away the right to a fair trial. He again mentions the small size of the county. He basically says he realizes that Slough County is sophisticated and there's a university here, but still it's so small it's saturated as far as the coverage and what people know in the area regarding the case. He reiterated that all 5 factors apply in his opinion, and he wasn't going to go over those again because he knows that the judge has already considered them. He mentioned the Rodney King beating case, actually, and talked about how they showed every slide in the case to prove the beating was justified. Like they'd say, oh, right here, see the leg twitch? That's the reason you continue to beat him, right? And the cop would say, yeah. Okay, next page. This part pissed me off, actually. They always find a way to try to work this in. He basically said how Kristin's remembered in the best light, yet everybody knows now that other things were going on in her, contrary to the idealized impression that everybody has. And what I want to say is, WTF, does that have to do with her being murdered? And the things they want to throw shade at are pretty minor. I'd say they're very typical of a female college student, to be honest. Actually pretty tame compared to a lot of what goes on at college, but that's what they do. They throw dirt and shame and anything they can to make the victim look horrible. And that is just one of the things in court cases that just makes my blood boil. Gosh. He talked about the picture on the billboards, how it's her sweet little yearbook picture, and that's not even what she looked like at the time. And of course, he feels like that's strategized to make her look like a little angel, so people are even more sympathetic towards what's going on with her. And that has nothing to do with it, in my opinion. Nobody should be murdered, regardless. I don't care if you... that's irrelevant to me, and those kind of things make me angry, as you can probably tell in my voice. He talked about when the wanted posters came out, it actually caused people to throw rocks at the Floreses. And then he hits on Susan's declaration, the one that the prosecution once not considered. And he says that indeed the information in Susan's declaration is verifiable. And there's proof with photographs, police reports, and so on. People out there with bullhorns, traffic jams, verbal assaults, over 25 years of it, and he says a lot of it is verifiable. He talked about people driving past her house. Excuse me, that was incorrect. He talked about people driving past the billboards on their way to court, and how could you possibly not have prejudice in your mind in that case? And by the way, Paul's brow was still furrowed, and it was starting to look painful. This was like 45 minutes into the hearing, and I'm sure he's going to have a headache later from doing that for so long. Let's see. The singer talked about how people here in our county consider this our case. That was his quote, our case. And that although national coverage isn't the direct impact, but when national coverage happens, it does impact the locals. When the 48 hours is on, people, they're sitting in their living rooms here in San Luis Obispo saying, that's our case. Same with the podcast, the billboards, the news. And everything always points to Paul being the perpetrator who did this to her. Let's see, Sanger would go back, but he realizes the judge already has all this. He's not going to just keep repeating his points. And okay, I think this is where the judge starts talking, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so yeah, so the prosecution had nothing else to say after this last bit, nor did Ruben's lawyer. So the judge says, first thing he says is he won't strike Susan's statement, but he wanted it known that her statements were not a big factor in his decision, and that he has to predict whether there can be a fair trial with the information he has on how now, and make a move now regarding what might be possible as far as a fair trial. And he says he does feel it's problematic for them to get a fair trial, and he's going to break down why in a minute. But he wanted everybody to know what his ruling was first, and then he'll explain why he's ruling that way, that he does feel it would be problematic. Due to the gravity of the crime, this is a murder and rape of a teenage college student, and the ripple effects will be in the community long after this is all decided, whichever way it goes, and it's been part of the community for quite some time now. So I looked at the faces when the judge said this part. I wanted to kind of see if I could gauge any reactions, and Paul, his brow released slightly, but not much. Ruben basically stayed the same. The prosecution kind of looked down, and from then on, she was looking down and making notes. She wasn't looking at the camera after the judge started talking. Sanger didn't have much of a reaction, but Ruben's attorney, he had the biggest reaction. He kept shaking his head yes, like up and down, like yes motion repeatedly when the judge started saying this. Okay, so back to this. The judge says the heart of his decision is related to point number 2 of 5 regarding the media coverage. And it does support that this is the highest profile case in San Luis Obispo County. It's been in the news for 25 years, and it's actually increased coverage over time. It has not waned. It has not blunted over time. And It's always Paul. Even though it's factual information being released, they're always pointing to Paul. He talks about the speculation at one time that Kristin was buried in Susan's backyard. And they talked about Paul's background and the items found in his house in searches, which is related to other sexual assaults and videos of him sexually assaulting people. I shouldn't be saying that. Sorry, YouTube. I'll try to use the abbreviations. He talked about the podcast and the 48 hours and all that national coverage and how it does increase local coverage as well. The memorials and the vigils and all these are natural for the community to support the family, but it doesn't support the presumption of innocence. Instead, it causes suspicion. He talked about some articles locally. I'm not going to name them all, but two of them that he did touch on was a Slow Tribune article where it talked about for the past quarter century, everyone here that was around and part of the case at the time has been on an emotional roller coaster. They also, the judge talked about the people at Ruben's house with cell phones and crowds out front as they were making the arrests, and they had to put up like blockades, and people were out there with strollers and roaming around. And he also made some local quotes of comments that people have made and how they feel about the case, and they want the resolution and all these things. He does feel like it needs to be moved to a more neutral venue where there's not preconceived notions like there are here in SLO County. The size of the county is between 280,000 and 290,000 people. The judge says it is too small to dilute the local coverage that's happened over all these years because the coverage has saturated the population. He talked about how Kristin and Paul are now household names, and that the number one reason for his decision was all the media coverage, which in my mind I thought, what a double-edged sword that we have this wonderful podcast and all this coverage, and that ends up being used against the fact that it should be tried here, which is fine. I mean, the evidence is going to stand regardless of where the case is tried, and we don't want an appeal if something goes wrong, so let's just digest that it's going to be moved. Pray that the justice is served properly. Pray that the attorneys are able to do their job and present their case well wherever the county ends up. I'm really curious to see where they think this can be moved to. Even Ruben's lawyer said he doesn't think it can be tried anywhere, although they're not trying to ask it to be moved out of state, which I guess happens on very rare, high-profile occasions. Okay, in closing here, the judge had to move on to some other cases that he needed to do today, so he scheduled on Monday, April 4th. They're going to have a chamber conference. It won't be on Zoom, and where all the attorneys are going to get together and discuss all of this to put it on record. And Sanger basically asked Paul to call his office so they could discuss all of this prior to Monday. And the judge said the trial date still stands for April 25th of 2022. The readiness date also still stands. I think that's April 6th, the readiness hearing, which I'm going to attend via Zoom. This all lasted about 1 hour, and that's all I got for you. So let me get this wrapped up so I can get it out to you guys right away. Hopefully that gives you some insight, breakdown of over an hour's worth of hearings and a small dose of, let's see, I guess I got it around 25 minutes, including all my commentary and stuff. So I hope this helps, guys. Justice for Kristin.
If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just speak love and watch the smiles come.
Thanks for
Bring
watching.
my spirits up.
Don't forget to stop and smell the flowers.
There's some shit I like to fix, but I